Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you've been around my channel for any length of time, you may know that I'm a little bit of a romance hater. I really don't care for contemporary romance or romantasy or any of these kinds of more romance-forward subgenres, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about some romances I do actually like since Valentine's Day is coming up pretty soon, and I wanted to give you some recommendations for books you may like if you, like me, kind of hate romance. So what I found over the last couple of years is that I don't so much hate romance as a concept, and I don't hate books that have romance in it. In fact, I often quite really enjoy books that have romances in them, but my problem is that I need there to be some more significant kind of world or plot thing going on, and I often find that romance, especially what might be considered like cozier versions of romance, tends to fall flat for me because I don't feel like the stakes really matter, and that's usually my problem, is that the stakes don't seem like they're going anywhere, they're not meaningful, and so I struggle to kind of keep my interest in the story. So with that said, all of the books that I've got here today are ones that typically I would say fall more heavily into another genre, like fantasy or sci-fi or police procedural or something along those lines, but also have a very strong romance that is a central part of the plot. So that's kind of the formula I found works for me, so hopefully if you are like me, maybe these will work for you as well. The first one I want to mention is I think one of my all-time favorite romances I've read, and it's A Marvelous Light by Freya Marske. This is a historical fantasy set in the Edwardian era, following these two men who kind of get thrown together when one of them, who is not in the magic world, he's not a magician, gets accidentally assigned as the liaison from the kind of normal world to the magic world and finds out that magic exists, and all in one fell swoop also gets cursed, and he's working with his counterpart in the magical world to try and get uncursed. The two of them spend a lot of time together, they fall in love, and it is just such a sweet book. And I think part of the reason this really works for me is kind of twofold. One, a lot of the romance is built on really good communication between our two protagonists, Robin and Edwin. They spend a lot of time talking to each other, getting to know each other, building trust in each other. Because of that, I feel like a lot of the romancier parts of the book are also character growth moments. So it's not just that like there are sex scenes for the sake of sex scenes being there, which usually kind of annoys me. I don't dislike reading sex scenes, it just kind of annoys me when they're there just for the sake of having them. So what happens, I think, in this book is that the sex scenes that are there, because believe me, there are plenty, it's quite a steamy book, they're there because they are driving forward the character growth in some way, and I really appreciate that about this. I think the other reason this really works for me is that the stakes really matter. It really feels like Robin's life is in peril because of the curse that he's experiencing, and it feels like the things that he and Edwin are doing to try and break the curse are really significant. That said, this book I think got kind of mismarketed early on because I think it gets marketed as a like fantasy murder mystery, but it's much more a romance with some murder mystery plot elements thrown in. So I think you kind of need to go in with that expectation, but I think that if you do that, the slow pace of this one really works. It gives so much time for the characters to get to know each other and for their relationship to develop in, I think, a fairly realistic way, and I just really enjoyed it. I also love all the side characters. There's a lot of interesting things happening with them, and this is the beginning of a trilogy, and the second book I also want to recommend, even though I haven't actually finished it yet. The second book is A Restless Truth by Freya Marske, obviously, and this one is following Robin's sister Maud and her romance with a woman named Violet. I've only just read like the first 30 pages or so, but I already love Maud and Violet so much. I love Maud in the first book. I love her even more in the second one now that she's getting to be a central character of her own, and Violet is such an interesting contrast to Maud's personality, but they're both kind of chaos gremlins, and I just love them both immensely. So I want to recommend that one as well, even though I haven't finished it, because I can tell it's also going to be very, very good. I've also heard that the series gets progressively steamier as it goes on as well, like there's more sex scenes in the later books, so if that's something that interests you, there's that. Up next, I want to mention Sword Dance by A.J. DeMoss. This is also the beginning of a trilogy, and I think this trilogy follows the same couple throughout. But this is one of the more recent entries into my list of romances I enjoy. This one I picked up on the recommendation of my best friend because she read this several years ago and loved it. And I have to say she's correct. I absolutely love this book as well. I gave it 5 stars. I think it's flawed. I think there's some silliness and some plot holes, but I feel like it's so sincere and it's so fun that I just kind of didn't care about that. And this is another one where I feel like the stakes really managed to feel real. So this one is following Demiscos, who is a soldier who is traveling to visit a friend of his to negotiate a contract for fish sauce because she owns a fish sauce factory, and it's in this kind of ancient Greek inspired world. And he's living in an era where there's kind of tenuous peace with some other countries and some other groups of people that he feels like the peace is good and necessary, but it's quite clear that there's a lot of differing political opinions in this time. So while he's traveling to go visit his friend to negotiate this fish sauce contract, he kind of finds himself getting thrown into a situation where there are these like dueling perspectives on the current political situation, and because of like hospitality laws and like propriety, he can't just, like, get the hell out of there like he wants to. So he kind of gets thrown in this situation. He's not really great at politics. It's not his forte. He's very much like a strategist. But in the midst of all of that, he ends up meeting Varazda, who is gender fluid, and the two of them have just a really sweet romance in the middle of a very chaotic situation when some horrible, horrible philosophy students go rogue. It is so silly, it is so fun, and this is another one where I feel like the romance really hinges on the characters having good communication. There's a lot of moments in this where the characters kind of put their foot in their mouths and have to deal with the consequences of that. I feel like that works really well because they don't know each other, they're also from different cultures, and so they're constantly like making mistakes and saying the wrong thing. But they own up to that and they work through it, and I feel like that helps make the kind of fast pace of the romance work. This is also, again, quite fast-paced because it's taking place over just a couple of days when these events are happening, and that pace, I think, normally wouldn't work for me, but because of that communication, it works really well. And kind of the stressful situation they're thrown into together. They grow very close very quickly because they're in the situation where they don't have a lot of people that they can trust, and it's just really sweet the way it develops. It's also really interesting because they're having to deal with that like culture clash situation where they're trying to figure out like, where do we go from here? Like, our lives are going to be very different once we get out of this situation, and kind of, are we going to see each other again? So that's kind of a big question in the story as well. And I just really enjoyed these characters. Demiskos and Varazda are both wonderful, and I really liked seeing the way their different strengths work together as they like collaborated to solve the problem at hand. Next up is another one that I think is just like really damn fun. This is The God and the Gumiho by Sophie Kim. Again, at the start of a series. This one I believe is also a series that's going to follow the kind of the same couple throughout, or at least for the first two books. But this one is following a fallen trickster god named Sokka, who's kind of misanthropic. He hates humanity, but he's on Earth because he's been kicked out of heaven and he has to try and send a certain number of monsters to the underworld to regain his divinity. But he ends up getting sent on the trail of a demon that is harassing people, killing people in the human realm, and it's one of the few creatures that can actually kill a god, so he's kind of sent off to hunt it. But at the same time, a series of murders happens that looks like it might have been done by the infamous Scarlet Fox, who is this really well-known and kind of infamous Gumiho who killed like 1,000 people sometime in the past, and now is the reason that there's like really strict laws against Gumiho activity. And he's sent out to kind of find and defeat both of these creatures. But what he doesn't know is that the annoying, bubbly, sunshine woman who shows up and decides to be his personal assistant and be a problem for him is the Scarlet Fox, and she's trying to keep him off of her tail. And it's just really fun. This is so silly. It's very tropey. It's very much inspired by K-dramas, which is a genre I'm not super familiar with. So I think that probably impacted my reading of this one. I think I gave this like 4 stars as opposed to 5 because there were some things that were very much like plot conveniences to push the romance forward. But the characters are just so fun. The mystery in it is so fun. It's very like over the top, dramatic, and it really commits to its emotional beats. This one ends up actually being very angsty, and I really appreciated the fact that the author went a very dark route with it and committed to that and really made the over the top emotion matter. And I just really enjoyed like every minute I spent reading it. I'm really excited for book 2 as well. We're getting the sequel in 2025. I have an arc for it I'm going to be reading when it's closer to time, and I just could not be more excited to be diving back into this one. The next thing I want to mention is not so much a specific book, but an author, because I think Elliot de Bedard writes a lot of books that have romance in them. They aren't necessarily specifically romances, but there's usually like a strong romantic element, and I always really enjoy her characters and the way that she writes those. So the few that I would most highly recommend if you're looking for something that's a little more on the romancy side are Fireheart Tiger, which is a short standalone novella about abuse, actually. It's about a young princess who gets caught between her demanding mother and her abusive ex and is trying to like navigate this political situation between the two of them, but finds help in an unexpected source. And I just really enjoy the characters here. And then the other one I really want to recommend is a spin-off series from her Dominion of the Fallen series, which is a longer kind of political fantasy series. But this is the Dragon and Blade, I think, or Dragons and Blades series. And it follows Asmodeus, who is a demon, and he's married to a dragon named Tien. And the two of them have these various like murder mysteries that they're trying to solve. It's just very sweet, but also I think it's interesting because it's following a established couple. They're an established couple. The two of them are already together. I think they get together in the main series, although as far as I can tell, the spin-offs don't spoil the main series, so like don't worry about that. But it's following them, and they're already married. They're already in this established relationship, so it's kind of looking at other elements of their relationship as they navigate new difficulties that are arising out of their being together, that are arising out of the clash of their personalities. And I find that really interesting as a direction for something that has kind of a romance element in it, because there are a lot of kind of romancy scenes in these, but these books also have like really strong murder mystery elements. I think there's 2 in the series so far, and it's of Dragons, Feasts, and Murders and of Charms, Ghosts, and Grievances, and I really loved both of them. But I just think this is an interesting take on kind of a romance story. Another series I want to recommend is Criminal Intentions by Cole McCade. This is another kind of long-running series that follows a specific couple, following Malcolm and Songjay, who are cops. They're both detectives, technically, working in Baltimore, Maryland, and they're both queer, and they get kind of thrown together. Neither of them really likes working with a partner, but they get thrown together at the start of the series because there's a couple of murders that have happened that look like maybe young queer men are being targeted, and so they're put on the case. They hate each other initially, but it's very much a slow burn. I really enjoy the way that their friendship develops. It very much starts out as a friendship that they initially kind of hate each other, but they realize that they work really well together, that they have very compatible strengths. They're very good at different things, but they work together really well, so they kind of start to build a rapport with each other. And then as the series goes on, it develops into more of a romance. And once it hits that like romance track, it really goes for it. It is a very fun series. It's also remarkably dark at a lot of points. I think it deals with some really big topics that I think are interesting. There's one in particular that I like that kind of is asking the question of like, what is justice, and are law and justice the same thing? I think the answer to that is no, and I think that's kind of the direction that the book goes, but that's kind of an example of some of what the series is doing. And I think there's also an interesting author note on the series where the author talks about having a close family member who is a cop and having that difficulty of navigating having a family member who is a cop because of the abuses of the system and the ways that the American justice system mistreats minorities, but also having to like balance that with loving this person who was in their family, and also knowing that like that person's role of being a cop influenced the way that they interacted with their family. So there's a lot of like, I think, complex ideas here, and I think Cole McCade approaches them with a lot of sensitivity, and I just really appreciate the way that they tackle those topics in their books. But the romance here is very, very central. It's a lot about the mysteries, but it's also a lot about the development of the relationship between Malcolm and Songjay, and I just feel like it's done so well. It's so believable. I love the characters so much, and they're just really fun to read about. Penultimate thing I want to mention is basically everything by Everina Maxwell. At the very least, her 2 novels, which are Winter's Orbit and Ocean's Echo. These are both set in kind of the same sci-fi universe, and I feel like Everina Maxwell's world building tends to fall a little flat for me. It always feels a little bit thin, and like some pieces of it haven't been completely thought through. But I think where Everina Maxwell really excels is characters. Their characters are so interesting and well developed, and I think that the way the characters kind of come together throughout the stories just works really, really well. In particular, I think Ocean's Echo is stronger. Winter's Orbit, I think, is their debut. Ocean's Echo takes the successes of Winter's Orbit and just really builds upon them. I love the characters. So in Winter's Orbit, we have Kiem and... why does his name always escape me? There's a guy. I'll put his name somewhere on screen. I can't remember his name. He's really like the main character. I think this is the one weakness in Winter's Orbit in terms of the romance, is that it's very much about the one guy, and Kiem is just there to be like supportive boyfriend man. or supportive husband man, actually, because they get pushed into an arranged marriage. So that's the trope for that first one. And then in Ocean's Echo, it kind of solves that problem because it feels much more like the two characters are more individual and they have their own issues that they're dealing with. But I feel like Maxwell's relationship conflicts are really realistic and well developed, and those are the pieces that have been really, really well thought through in the ways that these people interact with each other. And when there's miscommunication in these books, it's actually a version of it that I like. I tend to really hate miscommunication, especially in a romance story. It really works in Maxwell's books. They're really good at putting together miscommunications that make sense, where the characters have been like, they have been communicating, or they're just talking past each other, or they have been communicating but they have different cultural backgrounds and so they're kind of misunderstanding each other. And it's really, really interesting from that perspective, because I typically hate a miscommunication trope, but it kind of comes up in both of these. I really enjoy the ways that these romances develop. Like I said, I really like Tennille and Surratt in Ocean's Echo. I think just a little bit more than Janin, that's his name, and Kiem in Winter's Orbit. That said, I love them both. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with both of these books. They're super fast-paced, they're fun, they're political. Again, the world building's a little flat, so the politics is a little wibbly-wobbly, but on the whole, super, super fun and deal with some interesting ideas. Also, I want to say that one of them, I'm not going to say which one because I feel like it's a spoiler, but one of them has a very poignant and subtle depiction of domestic violence and abuse and the character kind of healing from that. And I feel like that was super well done. It was very sensitively drawn, and I really enjoyed that plotline and the way that it kind of resolved across the story. The final one I want to talk about is not so much a romance as a sci-fi that happens to have a very strong romance element in it that is kind of parallel with the development of the plot. This is The Blinded Stars by Megan E. O'Keefe. Once again, the start of a series. I don't think any of these are like fully standalones, actually. This one is following Tarquin, Mercator, and Nyra Sharp, that's her name. They are on very opposite sides of a conflict. Tarquin is the heir to this kind of mega corporation situation in the galaxy, and Nyra is his father's former bodyguard who has since been kind of sentenced to being locked away. It's a world where you can be reprinted if you die, and her mind has been basically locked away because she tried to speak out against the Mercator family, and the two of them end up kind of unwittingly on the same mission to a new cradle planet that they're gonna mine for resources. Tarquin's going to prove that his family is not responsible for this collapse syndrome that's been happening to all of the cradle planets. Nyra is there to prove that they are. However, things go completely awry. The ship crashes, they're trapped on Sixth Cradle, and they have to work together to survive. As they're doing that, a bunch of mysteries unfold, and there's a lot of like political stuff going on. There's action, there's survival. It's a really, really fun book, and it's really tense and stressful in a really fun way. I really enjoyed it, but Tarquin and Nyra's relationship, the way it develops, and the romance that kind of flourishes between them is a really important element of how they survive on this planet, that they have to learn to work together. They kind of have this animosity early on, and they have to learn to work together. They have to get along to survive. And so the way that it develops is really important for the plot and like the things that they learn about the plot. So I felt like it worked really well. It was believable, especially given the very stressful situation that they're in. And this was another one where it went full angst at the end, and I really appreciated the author committing to that, of setting up these really strong emotional stakes and going for it. So if you like an angsty romance, this one and The God and the Gumiho are going to be the two for you. So those are all the recommendations I have for you, and one of the things that I've noticed as I was pulling together this list is I don't have anywhere near enough sapphic recommendations on my shelves. I realize that I haven't read very many, and I definitely need more. So my question of the day is going to be if you know any good sapphic romance recommendations that are specifically like in a genre, not necessarily romantasy, but like fantasy romance, sci-fi romance, crime, mystery, thriller, romance, anything in kind of a genre like that. Let me know down in the comments below, because I have like none on my shelves, and that is a problem. I need to fix that. I have like two that are on my radar. I know of The Jasmine Throne and I know of The Unspoken Name. I plan to read both of those, and I think I have both on my shelf as well, but I just don't have enough. recommendations for that. So definitely let me know down in the comments below if you know of any good books that I should check out. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.